Welcome back to Nasher News interview series, where we meet with inspiring authors, publishers, and artists from all over the world. Nasher News is the first platform in the Arab region dedicated to sharing news and updates of the publishing industry and literature worldwide. I'm Farida Walid, and I'm very excited to welcome our special guest, Dr. Shahd Al Shammari, who is a Kuwaiti writer and a professor. She's also known for her research that focuses on human and women's rights, disability challenges, and illness narrative. She also published 6 books, and all the books are in English. Welcome, Dr. Shahd, and thanks for your time, and it's a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thank you very much, Farida, for the invitation, and thank you to Nasher News for being such a great platform for authors and for researchers. I always follow Nasher News because of the amount of diversity that you're always exploring, so I'm very happy to be here.
It's our pleasure to have you. So I'm going to start away with the first question. Can you tell us more about yourself? What inspired you to be an author? And also, why did you choose female issues and disability as your focus genre?
Excellent. Okay. Well, as you said, so I'm a professor of literature, but before being a professor of literature, I was also interested in writing. And I live with disability. I live with multiple sclerosis, which is a neurological condition. It affects many men and women who are young, usually around the ages of 18 to 40, sometimes older. And it's a topic that's not really discussed in the Arab world in general, let alone in the Gulf region. And as I began living with the condition, I started feeling that I need to write about it, and I had a responsibility to write about illness, to write about women's bodies. And so I kind of moved from a very personal position to a more political position, to one that advocates for change. And that's pretty much how I started my journey. I believe that every writer, every academic, all of us actually, has a role to play in advancing society, in creating a more tolerant society, a society that is open to diversity. We need different voices. We need voices in literature. We need voices in the media. We need to see more diversity. We need to see more women, more children, more people who are living with illnesses and disabilities, and that's not portrayed enough. These voices are hardly ever heard. And I speak not just randomly, but as a scholar of literature. As I read the literature, whether from the Western literature or Arabic literature, they were barely there. These communities were barely there, almost invisible. We don't read about these experiences. And if we do, we see them in a very, very negative, almost tragic light. And I believe I wanted to change that somehow. So that's who I am. I'm very passionate about change, and I'm very passionate about writing and writing different narratives. I'm trying to change the story, I think.
It's very interesting indeed, and I think we need as much as Arab voices as possible. My second question will be, did you face any rejections prior to your first published book? And if yes, how did you deal with it? And have you ever considered self-publishing?
Absolutely. Thank you, Farida. That's such an important question, actually. So I have done self-publishing also, and that was mainly for the poetry books. Poetry was not really something that most publishers wanted to publish as a full collection. But for my first book, that was called Notes on the Flesh, it was published in 2017. It was mainly about disability. And so I sent the manuscript out maybe, to hundreds and hundreds of publishers in the US, in the UK, in the Arab world, even in publishers in Kuwait, in the UAE. I sent it everywhere. And I was getting rejected over and over again. And I was starting to lose hope, really. I didn't have any kind of interest from publishers, especially in the West. They wanted to know more about this tragic figure or the stereotype of the Arab woman. They didn't want to hear more about disability, even though there's a claim that we want diversity. Actually, there seemed to be no interest. I remember many of the letters I received saying, we're very sorry. We think it's an important topic, but it is too specific. Too specific meaning not everyone understands or lives with disability. So we want something that is more, common. We want it to be about we want it to be about the general Arab woman or the Gulf woman who is living a healthy, privileged life. They didn't want the disability aspect. And so hundreds of rejections later, one publisher picked it up, which I was really grateful for. It was a Maltese publisher in Malta, and the publisher said, I feel a sense of responsibility to bring these narratives out. So it is very interesting that disability is not a theme that publishers really want to hear about. Again, I thought it was otherwise because we're always told we want diverse voices, but the reality seemed to be a little different in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awareness as well, and it's very important to have different kind of writings and genre out there. My third question is, your new novel, Head Above Water: Reflection on Illness, is your upcoming book, which will be published, I assume, next year. Can you give our audience a glimpse of what is it about?
Absolutely. Thank you, Farida. I love talking about the new book because the new book is actually the first memoir from the Gulf by a woman, a Khaliji woman, someone living with a disability. It also took a long time to find a publisher for it. The same kind of idea of rejection based on the topic being too specific to the Gulf, too specific about disability. But finally, a UK-based publisher picked it up, Neem Tree Press, and they are really interested in diverse voices. They want more stories by Arab women, by Arab authors. They want more stories from the Gulf. They published quite a few interesting things, so they were happy to take on Head Above Water. So Head Above Water is a memoir. It is nonfiction. And the reason it is a memoir is because I couldn't find memoirs from the Gulf about women living with illnesses or about women generally, even their lives. We don't hear much about their lives. So the book traces my experience not just with illness, but also with teaching and how sometimes university life is not very accessible to students living with disabilities. It's not always accessible in terms of the architecture. There's not elevators everywhere, and so on. So I look at these experiences and I narrate them through a series of conversations between myself and other women, women who are struggling in one way or another, whether it's through society's expectations of them, through a very patriarchal ideology. So it is a very, very much conversational type book, even though it is a memoir. I wanted it to be very personal, just like sitting down and having a conversation about these really important topics that we don't talk about. So it's a full-length memoir. It will be out, inshallah, World MS Day, which is May 31st, and it will be in 2022. So it's about 6 months from now. It is really exciting that it will be the first memoir from the Gulf written by a woman, I feel. So this makes me really, really excited. And I hope that it will receive, at least an interest from all readers alike, whether you are, living with an illness or a disability, mental illness, physical illness, or even if you're able-bodied and you are interested in knowing what it's like to experience the world from a different angle.
We're looking forward for it and to read it, put our hands on it. Would you be translating it to Arabic for the Arab readers?
I hope so, inshallah. We're hoping that there will be an interest in publishers to translate it, to pick it up from the British publisher. Again, I really, really would love for that to become more accessible for everyone. It is written in English, but I hope that it will be translated into Arabic.
So how do you choose the characters that you write about, and how do you bring them to life in your stories or narratives?
Well, I think every writer is always observing their surroundings. I'm very observant and I'm a very good listener, I think. So I'm always listening to people's stories, people's struggles. I love talking to people. So I'm always observing what it's like to be someone else. And I choose my characters based on the voices that are not usually heard, the voices that tend to be marginalized, the voices that struggle to be heard, to actually see themselves represented on screen or in media or in books. So most of my characters tend to be somehow outcasted by society in one way or another. And when I say society, it can be even the concept of bullying and what happens in classrooms. I always look at, who are the students that get more bullied? What's it like to be living, in a different body, whatever that body is. Again, a lot of stigma is constantly surrounding how we perceive each other. So my characters usually are stigmatized, and I try to put that out there so that I can start the conversation of what it's like to be stigmatized, really.
So this year's International Day of Persons with Disabilities theme is leadership and participation of persons with disabilities towards an inclusion and accessible and sustainable post-COVID-19 world. So how do you see the pandemic and its impact on people with disabilities, but particularly authors?
Well, I think the pandemic has taught us all quite a few lessons about what it's like to be afraid of illness, what it's like to be living with the randomness that illness can just happen to all of us. We're not all protected all the time from being ill or from being disabled. It can happen at any moment. And what COVID's presence in our life constantly reminds us of that. We're always aware that, oh wow, something can happen to me. I am mortal. I can also get ill. So I think it got people thinking about the body. It got people thinking about health. It got people thinking about illness and disability, which I feel is actually a positive thing. These voices were suddenly part of the conversation. Everyone was suddenly working from home. A lot of disabled individuals or people with determination, as we say in the UAE, actually work from home. A lot of us, or a lot of people, feel the need to be safely at home, away from a lot of illnesses because of being immunocompromised, having an immune system that is not strong. So a lot of people actually are not aware that this is a segment of society that exists, and that this is a segment of society that actually lives their daily lives isolated to be protected from illnesses. So disabled authors have a lot to say, and I've seen a bit more of interest from publishers, even magazines, journals, asking about what it's like to be living in the pandemic as a disabled author or someone with a disability who is basically still sheltering themselves, still isolated because of the pandemic. So there has been an interest, especially after the pandemic. Also now we are more interested in creating accessible environments. Working from home is an option now. That was not an option before. And again, now we are even flexible with meeting deadlines and meeting dates. A lot of people living with mental illnesses or with physical illnesses struggle to meet deadlines. Even in academia, professors now are a bit more flexible because of the pandemic. So I think it has really taught us a lot.
I agree. It also brought some positive things into our lives. So growing up, what books and authors had influenced you?
Well, I think as all writers, I was always a reader. So I started reading very, very early on. I read everything I could find. I read a lot of American authors, only because I was in an American school, and so that was the language most accessible. I read Judy Blume, who's an American author. She wrote about what it's like to be a child struggling to fit in with your siblings or to fit in school. I read a lot of biographies actually as a teenager. I read a lot about nonfiction. I wanted to read what it's like to be, for example, the president of the United States, or all of these stories. I was really interested in biographies because I was interested in how people live their lives and then later write about them. And I think that carried through until I realized, where are biographies by women? Where are their voices, especially Arab women? Where are they in their stories? We do have some like Latif al-Zayyat, and we have a few interesting, usually they tend to be Egyptian authors, but in the Gulf I couldn't find anything. Even growing up, I wanted more biographies, and I couldn't find that anywhere. Again, reading was always, I read all genres. I read mystery, I read crime, I read all of the classics. And the classics, I always tell my students, read the classics, even though they are difficult to read. They have a lot of interesting ways in how we can describe what it means to be, human. The plot lines are always very well done. So I read a lot of the Brontes, a lot of Jane Austen, all of these classics, really.
Interesting. So when you write fiction, yet at the same time a memoir, how do you go about balancing the facts and the fiction?
Well, it's a very difficult line. Blending the two is incredibly difficult. And so as an author, you have a responsibility to tell the truth if you're writing a memoir. And so for Head Above Water, it is a complete memoir that is telling the truth. There is an ethical responsibility to it. With fiction, of course, it's different. We have the freedom to create an entire universe, to create characters. And so Notes on the Flesh has a lot of fictional aspects to it, mainly fictional stories. And again, I had the flexibility because it was fictional. With the nonfiction aspect, I divided the book into two. The nonfiction aspect is clearly that, and then the fictional aspect is basically fiction. It is invented, and the characters are invented.
Interesting. I know that your new book is still to come up next year, but would you be able to give us like a sneak peek of a bit of a reading from your new book, Head Above Water?
Absolutely. I think I can maybe read a short, just a very short excerpt from it. Great. So I'll just go ahead and start. So, a visit to death interrupted my life at the age of 25. I wonder sometimes if I can recall it as it happened, as I saw it, as I felt it. Would I want to narrate this experience, tell the story of this half-interrupted life? Stories are who we are. Stories make up our most vulnerable moments. And in storytelling, we have the power to gain a sense of agency over our lives. In dialogue and in conversations are the moments that make sense of fragments that we recollect and we reassemble to construct a grander narrative. I have always told my students that storytelling is an integral part of life. We cannot separate life from the stories we tell ourselves and others, the stories we tell ourselves about others, and stories others tell about us. But these stories are distorted by failing bodies, failing memories, lapses and relapses, repeated delays in the transmission of brain signals to a body that forgets and remembers. Memory is a collection of snapshots in time. The work of remembering is hard labor, emotional at its best, traumatic at its worst. We cannot help but project ourselves onto these mirrors, and pen and paper fail to convey what really happened, what was and what wasn't. How are we to tell the story from one perspective if we have never experienced the other? How can I speak as the mentor, the professor, when a student self still pulsates in me? My characters are invoked from memories, and at other times accounts of other people's memories, gaps that I cannot fill. In the Quran, we are told about the vagueness of the soul and its home. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And they ask you about the soul. Say, the soul is one that commands of my Lord, and you are not given aught of knowledge but a little. And because souls are a vast area of the unknown, and we have limited and mortal knowledge, then the heart is the finding place, the knowing place. The mind, reason, thought, knowledge is the place where we ask the hows and whys, and we find nothing but a road back into the heart. The method of the heart is my starting and ending point. Binary thought will fail me as bodies fail to house us. I look at these bits and pieces as a bridge between that which I know to have happened, that which I think happened, and that which I fashion out of a big belief in narrating the self. And that's it. Thank you, Farida, for letting me read it.
Very beautifully written and right to the core. And I think a lot of people will just, relate and resonate with every word you said, like I did right now. I just felt it. We can't wait to read the new book and can't wait to, for it to be released. I hope everybody will, be able to buy it once it's released. It'll be on Amazon, right? It'll be on Amazon.
Yes. Of course, it'll be on Amazon, and we hope that there will be booksellers also selling it, inshallah, in the Arab world. We look forward to it, and I'm really excited that finally we will have even something to teach in our classes about Arab women's bodies and lives.
Exactly. Amazing. Such an interesting novel, book. I mean. So my last question is, you attended this year's Sharjah International Book Fair. In fact, you were one of the guests there. So what were your thoughts on it? And what is your first impressions? And is it your first time there as a guest or?
Yes, absolutely. That was the first time as a guest. I've always attended as a listener. I love it. I make sure I'm there. I always tell my students you have to attend. I was invited as a guest and I was very happy to be on a panel discussing what it means to be living as an author, what is the ethical responsibility of the author. The festival was brilliant, beautifully organized. The organizers were very welcoming. Meeting all of these wonderful authors was really exciting, and the panels were very diverse, which was excellent. One thing I would like to see more of is perhaps having sign language entrepreneurs standing right there and interpreting for all authors, all sessions, not just one or two sessions, because I think for such a beautiful festival, it is diverse and it should speak to everyone. So maybe just having more of that would be excellent for accessibility.
Thank you. It was such an insightful conversations, and thank you for telling us more about your journey and your books. Thank you for your time, and it was a pleasure to have you in Nashr News.
Thank you so much, Farida. I really appreciate the wonderful questions. Thank you so much.